The journey back to Earth was quiet, almost eerily so. Admiral Robert Hayes sat alone in his quarters aboard the flagship, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. The mission had been a success, but it didn't feel like a victory. Too much had been sacrificed. Too many lives risked. Too many doubts overcome. Hayes knew the galaxy wasn't saved. It was merely given a chance to endure. And even that came with no guarantees. Dr. Laura Bennett joined him after a while, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to Hayes, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. "You did it," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Not just the mission, the confession, the rescue, everything. You gave them something to believe in." Hayes shook his head slightly, his gaze still fixed on the stars. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "None of this would have worked without you, Foster, Zenara, everyone. It's not about me. It never was." Bennett smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed lingering worry. "Still, you took the biggest risks. You put yourself out there, not just physically, but emotionally. That kind of vulnerability isn't easy." "It shouldn't be," Hayes admitted. "If it were easy, it wouldn't mean anything. But I meant what I said back there, to them, and to myself. Humanity has made mistakes, and will probably make more. What matters is how we choose to move forward." Captain Daniel Foster entered the room a short while later, his usual stern demeanor softened by exhaustion. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "We're approaching Earth's orbit," he announced. "The Council's already sending messages asking for updates. Looks like they want a full report as soon as we land." Hayes sighed, rubbing his temples. "Of course they do. They'll want to know if it was worth it, if humanity gained anything from all this." Foster raised an eyebrow. "And did we?" Hayes thought for a moment before answering. "That depends on how you measure success. We stopped the black hole, sure. But more importantly, we proved that cooperation is possible, even among enemies. If nothing else, maybe that'll give us a fighting chance at peace." As the ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, Hayes stood alongside his advisors on the bridge, watching as the blue-green planet came into view. It was beautiful, fragile, and achingly familiar. For all its flaws, humanity's home was still worth protecting. And perhaps now, they weren't doing it alone. When they landed, crowds gathered to welcome the returning crew. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and banners waved in celebration. Yet Hayes moved through it all with quiet dignity, offering only brief remarks when pressed. This wasn't just humanity's triumph, he told the crowd. It was a shared effort, a reminder that survival isn't a competition. Let's honor that moving forward. Later, as he walked along a quiet beach under the fading light of sunset, Hayes reflected on everything that had happened. The Council's accusations, the black hole's threat, the fragile bonds now holding the galaxy together. It all felt distant, yet vividly real. He knew challenges lay ahead, both for humanity and the species they had fought beside. Trust wouldn't come easily, and old wounds wouldn't heal overnight. But for the first time, Hayes allowed himself to believe in the possibility of change. As the waves lapped gently at the shore, he looked up at the stars scattered across the night sky. Somewhere out there, countless lives continued their daily struggles, unaware of how close they had come to destruction, or how humanity had played a part in averting it. Hayes smiled faintly, feeling a rare sense of peace. Perhaps redemption wasn't found in grand gestures or flawless victories. Maybe it was enough to simply try, to reach out, to listen, to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who once called you an enemy. Whatever the future held, Hayes knew one thing for certain. The stars weren't so far apart after all. The crisis had passed, but the scars of the mission lingered. The rogue black hole's advance had been slowed, its destructive pull now contained by the network of graviton stabilizers. Yet the cost of success was etched into every face aboard the fleet. Admiral Robert Hayes stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes fixed on the swirling mass of darkness beyond the viewport. Though the immediate threat had been neutralized, the weight of what they had accomplished, and what it had taken to get there, pressed heavily on him. Dr. Laura Bennett sat nearby, her hands trembling slightly as she reviewed the final data from the stabilizers. The operation had pushed both humans and aliens to their limits. Equipment failures, near disasters, and moments of sheer terror had tested the fragile alliance at every turn. But somehow, they had held together. It worked, she murmured, almost to herself. Against all odds, it actually worked. Captain Daniel Foster leaned against the wall, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His expression was grim, though a flicker of pride showed through. "Too close for comfort," he said quietly. "If Hayes hadn't risked everything to save that Krillin ship, we might have lost them all. Or worse, the Council would have turned on us completely." Hayes didn't respond immediately. He was still staring out at the black hole, its edges now stabilized, but no less menacing. The memory of the rescue mission replayed in his mind. The tension, the fear, the split-second decisions that could have ended in disaster. He knew the risks he had taken weren't just about saving lives. They were about proving humanity's commitment to the Alliance, and while some delegates remained skeptical, others had begun to see him not as an adversary, but as a leader willing to put himself on the line. Back in the Grand Assembly Hall, the Council reconvened to formalize new agreements based on the lessons learned during the mission. The atmosphere was different this time. Less hostile, more reflective. Hayes addressed the delegates once more, his voice steady, but tinged with humility. "What we achieved wasn't easy," he began. "But it proved one thing. When we work together, we're stronger than any threat. Not just the black hole, but the divisions that have kept us apart for so long." His words resonated with many in the room. Zinara, who had played a key role in mediating discussions, floated closer to the podium. Her glowing form seemed to radiate approval as she spoke. "Admiral Hayes and his team have shown us the power of unity," she said softly. "Let this moment remind us that survival is not a competition. It is a shared responsibility." The Krillin leader, whose crew had been rescued, stepped forward unexpectedly. For the first time, his antennae were still, and his tone carried a note of respect. "Your actions saved my people," he admitted gruffly. "We will not forget this." Other delegates nodded in agreement, their expressions softening as they acknowledged the sacrifices made by humanity and its allies. As the session drew to a close, new treaties were signed, emphasizing mutual aid and accountability. Dr. Bennett watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction, knowing how much effort had gone into reaching this point. Foster, meanwhile, kept a watchful eye on the crowd, though the tension that had once filled the room was noticeably absent. Before departing the station, Hayes shared a quiet farewell with Zinara. "Thank you," he said simply, "for believing in us when even we doubted ourselves." Zinara inclined her glowing form gracefully. "Belief is a two-way path," she replied. "You reminded us of what truly matters." As humanity's ships prepared to leave, Hayes took one last look at the red giant star beyond the station. The galaxy was still fractured, its wounds far from healed, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. For perhaps the stars themselves weren't so divided after all. The joint mission to deploy the graviton stabilizers began under a cloud of cautious optimism. Ships from various species gathered near the edge of the rogue black hole's influence, their diverse designs reflecting the unique cultures that had come together for this desperate effort. Humanity's vessels stood out among them, sleek and metallic, but now marked with symbols of cooperation agreed upon by the Council. Admiral Robert Hayes watched from the bridge of the lead ship, his eyes scanning the fleet as they prepared to move into position. Dr. Laura Bennett worked tirelessly alongside alien scientists in the command center, her voice calm but urgent as she coordinated the complex operation. The stabilizers were delicate machines, requiring precise placement to counteract the black hole's immense gravitational pull. Each device needed to be anchored in specific locations, some perilously close to the swirling mass of darkness. "We're running out of time," she reminded the team, pointing to a holographic display showing the black hole's growing reach. "If we don't stabilize it soon, the effects will spread further." Captain Daniel Foster stood nearby, overseeing the security teams tasked with protecting the operation. Tensions remained high, and not everyone trusted humanity's intentions. Several alien ships kept their weapons powered, ready to act if anything seemed suspicious. Foster exchanged glances with Hayes, both men aware that one wrong move could shatter the fragile alliance they had built. As the first stabilizer was deployed, technical failures threatened to derail the mission. A malfunction in one of the energy conduits caused a delay, and panic rippled through the fleet. Some delegates demanded an immediate halt, fearing the risks outweighed the potential rewards. Hayes stepped forward, addressing the council over a shared communication channel. "I know this is dangerous," he said firmly, "but giving up now means certain disaster. Let us fix this together." His words seemed to steady the group, though skepticism lingered. Dr. Bennett worked alongside a Vorthic scientist, their combined expertise slowly resolving the issue. As the stabilizer came online, a collective sigh of relief echoed across the fleet. But the victory was short-lived. Another problem quickly arose when a Krillin transport ship drifted too close to the black hole's event horizon, its engines failing under the intense gravitational strain. Hayes didn't hesitate. "Prepare a rescue team," he ordered, strapping on a helmet as he moved toward the airlock. Foster tried to protest, insisting it was too risky for the Admiral to go himself, but Hayes cut him off. "This isn't about rank, it's about trust. If I don't lead by example, how can I expect them to follow?" Accompanied by a small crew, Hayes piloted a shuttle toward the stranded vessel. The journey was fraught with danger, the black hole's pull threatening to drag them in at every moment. Inside the shuttle, the tension was palpable, but Hayes remained focused, his calm demeanor steadying his team. When they reached the Krillin ship, they discovered the crew trapped inside, their escape pods damaged beyond use. With careful precision, Hayes guided his team in securing tow lines to the crippled vessel. It was a race against time, the black hole's pull growing stronger with each passing second. Finally, with a surge of thrust from the shuttle's engines, they managed to pull the Krillin ship free, narrowly avoiding disaster. Back aboard the fleet's flagship, Hayes addressed the council once more. "Today proved that we can overcome challenges when we work together," he said, his voice carrying both exhaustion and determination. "Let this be a reminder that our survival depends on unity, not division." Though doubt still lingered among some delegates, many were visibly moved by Hayes' bravery. For the first time, humanity wasn't just seen as a threat. It was seen as a partner willing to risk everything for the greater good. And as the stabilizers continued to slow the black hole's advance, hope began to take root where distrust had once festered. The private meeting room was smaller than the Grand Assembly Hall, but no less tense. A handful of delegates from various species sat around a circular table, their forms casting strange shadows in the dim light. Admiral Robert Hayes stood at one end, flanked by Dr. Laura Bennett and Captain Daniel Foster. Ambassador Zanera floated nearby, her glowing presence providing a faint sense of calm amidst the charged atmosphere. Hayes took a deep breath before speaking. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he began, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "I know trust is in short supply right now, but I hope we can focus on what truly matters, our survival." One of the delegates, a reptilian creature with scales that shimmered like oil, leaned forward. His yellow eyes narrowed as he studied Hayes. "You ask us to work with you, yet your actions have caused us harm. Why should we believe this isn't another scheme?" Hayes didn't hesitate. "Because the alternative is destruction. For all of us. The rogue black hole doesn't care about borders or grievances. It will consume everything unless we stop it together." Dr. Bennett stepped forward, holding up a holographic display. It showed detailed schematics of the graviton stabilizers, along with maps of the affected regions. These devices require precise placement, she explained, but they also need access to energy reserves located in your territories. Without cooperation, they won't work. A bird-like delegate ruffled its iridescent feathers, its sharp beak clicking softly. And if we agree, how do we ensure humanity doesn't use this as an opportunity to take more than it gives? Captain Foster spoke up, his tone firm but respectful. We're willing to operate under strict oversight. Every move, every decision, can be monitored by your representatives. This isn't about control, it's about survival. The room fell silent for a moment as the delegates exchanged glances. Some seemed skeptical, while others appeared to consider the proposal. Finally, a soft-spoken representative from an aquatic species broke the silence. If we proceed, what happens next? How much time do we have? Hayes exhaled slowly. Not enough. The black hole's pull is already affecting nearby systems. We need to act quickly, but carefully. Deployment alone could take weeks, if we work together. Zenera floated closer to the table, her tendrils pulsing gently. Time is not on our side, she said softly. But neither is division. If we delay further, the consequences will be irreversible. Her words seemed to resonate with some of the delegates. The reptilian creature tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Very well, he said after a long pause. We will discuss this among our leaders. But know this, any sign of betrayal, and we will withdraw completely. Hayes nodded, understanding the gravity of the warning. Fair enough. All we ask is a chance to prove ourselves. As the meeting concluded, the delegates filed out, leaving Hayes and his team alone in the room. Dr. Bennett sank into a chair, visibly exhausted. That went better than expected, she admitted. But it's not over yet. No, it's not. Hayes agreed, rubbing the back of his neck. He glanced at Foster, who still stood near the door, his hand resting near his weapon. We've bought ourselves some time. Now we need to make sure we use it wisely. Foster nodded grimly. Easier said than done. One wrong move, and they'll turn on us. Zenera approached Hayes, her glow dimming slightly. You've taken a bold step, she said quietly. But boldness alone won't be enough. You must continue to show them that humanity is willing to change. Hayes met her gaze, his resolve unwavering. We will, for better or worse. This is our chance to rewrite the story, not just for us, but for everyone. As they left the room, Hayes felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The Council's tentative agreement was fragile, and the road ahead was fraught with challenges. But for the first time, he allowed himself a small spark of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, unity was still possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The council chamber erupted into chaos once more as Admiral Robert Hayes finished speaking. His confession hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and charged with emotion. Some delegates sat in stunned silence, their expressions unreadable, while others immediately began shouting objections. The Krillins buzzed angrily, their antennae twitching in agitation. One of them clicked sharply, his voice rising above the noise. You admit to crimes, yet expect us to trust you now. This is unacceptable. The Vorthix floated closer to the center of the room, their watery forms shimmering with agitation. Your words are empty, one of them said in its melodic but cold tone. Apologies do not undo harm. Why should we believe this is not another trick? Even the Xirens, who had already accused humanity of deceit, seemed divided. Some leaned forward aggressively, their scaly faces contorted with anger, while others exchanged cautious glances, clearly unsure how to respond. Across the room, smaller factions whispered among themselves, their holographic translators flashing rapidly as they debated Hayes' claims. Dr. Laura Bennett stood beside Hayes, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on all of them. Turning slightly, she whispered to the Admiral, "Do you think they'll listen? Or was this too much?" Hayes didn't answer right away. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the sea of reactions. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. "It's hard to say, but at least we've given them something real to consider. They can't ignore this." Captain Daniel Foster shifted uncomfortably nearby, his hand resting instinctively near his blaster. He scanned the crowd, his sharp eyes catching every movement. The tension in the room was palpable, and he knew that one wrong move could escalate things quickly. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. "Some of them still look ready to fight." Ambassador Zanera stepped forward again, her glowing form casting soft light across the chamber. Her presence seemed to calm the room slightly, though the underlying hostility remained. "Admiral Hayes has spoken honestly," she said, her melodic voice cutting through the noise. "Whether or not you agree with his actions, his words deserve consideration. The threat before us affects us all, not just humanity." Her statement sparked a new wave of discussion. Some delegates nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the truth in her words. Others remained defiant, unwilling to let go of their grievances so easily. A delegate from a bird-like species with iridescent feathers spread its wings wide, flapping them dramatically for emphasis. "Even if we accept his apology, how can we be sure humanity won't betray us again? Trust must be earned, not given freely." Hayes listened carefully, his expression calm but resolute. When the moderator called for order, he raised a hand to signal he wished to speak again. The room quieted, though the tension remained thick. "I understand your doubts," Hayes said, addressing the council directly. "And I don't expect you to forgive us overnight. But I ask you this. Can we set aside our differences long enough to face this shared threat? If we fail, none of us will survive to argue about the past." His words struck a chord with some of the delegates. Slowly, a few began nodding, though others continued to glare at him with suspicion. Dr. Bennett leaned closer to him, whispering urgently, "We're gaining ground, but it's fragile. We need to keep pushing for cooperation." Hayes nodded slightly, his mind racing. He glanced at Captain Foster, silently asking if he was ready for whatever came next. Foster gave a slight nod in return, his jaw tightening with determination. As the session dragged on, Zanera worked tirelessly to mediate further discussions, urging both sides to focus on solutions rather than blame. Her efforts seemed to help, at least a little. By the end of the day, a small group of delegates agreed to meet privately with Hayes and his team to discuss the logistics of deploying the graviton stabilizers. Though the council was far from united, Hayes felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, cracks were appearing in the wall of distrust. Whatever happened next, humanity had taken a step toward redemption, and perhaps survival. On the third day of the summit, the atmosphere in the Grand Assembly Hall was heavier than ever. The delegates filed into their pods, their expressions ranging from frustration to outright hostility. Admiral Robert Hayes stood at the center of the room, flanked by Dr. Laura Bennett and Ambassador Zanera. Her presence beside him drew curious glances from the council. The luminary were known for their neutrality, and her decision to align herself with humanity, even temporarily, was unexpected. The holographic displays flickered to life above the chamber, projecting a swirling mass of darkness surrounded by distorted stars. It was the rogue black hole, its immense gravitational pull warping everything around it. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the image expanded, showing simulations of its destructive path. Entire star systems were at risk, including those inhabited by many of the species represented in the room. Hayes stepped forward, his voice clear and steady, despite the weight of the moment. "What you see here is not speculation," he began. "It is a threat that will affect us all if we do nothing. This rogue black hole is approaching our shared region of space. If it continues unchecked, it will destabilize entire planets, destroy ecosystems, and claim countless lives." The room erupted into murmurs. Some delegates shouted accusations, claiming Hayes was fabricating the data to justify human intervention. A Xiran representative slammed his clawed hand against his podium. "This is another trick," he hissed. You think we'll fall for such lies?" Hayes raised a hand, signaling for calm. "I understand your skepticism," he said, "but this isn't about manipulation. It's about survival. For all of us." He gestured toward Dr. Bennett, who activated another hologram. This one displayed schematics of sleek, metallic devices labeled *graviton stabilizers*. "These are experimental machines developed by humanity," Hayes explained. "They can slow the black hole's advance, but only if deployed correctly, and only if we work together." The Krillin leader clicked angrily. "Why should we trust you? You ask for access to our resources, our territories. How do we know this isn't just another way for you to take what isn't yours?" Before Hayes could respond, Zenera stepped forward. Her glowing form seemed to command attention, silencing the room. "Admiral Hayes has shared this information openly," she said, her melodic voice carrying authority. "Would you dismiss it without proof, or would you rather ensure the survival of your people?" Her words sparked a new wave of debate. Some delegates argued that cooperation was too risky, while others grudgingly admitted that humanity's technology might be their only hope. Captain Daniel Foster watched quietly from the sidelines, his hand resting near his weapon, ready for anything. Hayes took a deep breath, knowing the next part would be the hardest. "There's something else I need to say," he began, his tone softer but firm. "Humanity hasn't always acted honorably in the past. We've made mistakes, grave ones, that have caused pain and mistrust among your peoples. For that, I offer my deepest apologies." The room fell silent. No one had expected this confession, least of all from a military leader. Hayes continued, his voice tinged with emotion. "We're not perfect, but we're trying to change. And right now, we're asking for a chance, not to lead, but to stand alongside you as equals." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, some delegates began nodding. Others remained skeptical, their arms crossed tightly. But the tide had shifted slightly. Hayes had shown vulnerability, and in doing so, he had planted a seed of possibility. As the session ended, Zenera turned to Hayes. "You've taken the first step," she said quietly. "Now let's see where it leads." During a break in the formal sessions, Admiral Robert Hayes found himself wandering the corridors of the orbital station. The halls were wide and curved, lined with glowing panels that cast soft light over the polished floors. Alien delegates passed by in groups, their forms strange and varied, speaking in languages that filled the air with a mix of clicks, hums, and melodic tones. Despite the diversity around him, Hayes felt isolated. Every glance from the other species seemed to carry suspicion, as though they were waiting for him to make a misstep. It was then that he encountered Zenera. She stood near a large observation window, her luminous form casting a gentle glow that contrasted sharply with the harsh metallic surroundings. Unlike many of the other delegates, she exuded calmness, her movements slow and deliberate. Her presence was soothing, almost hypnotic, and Hayes felt drawn to her without fully understanding why. "Admiral Hayes," she said softly, turning to face him. Her voice was like a whisper carried on the wind, yet it carried an undeniable weight. "You seem troubled." Hayes hesitated for a moment before nodding. "You could say that," he admitted, joining her by the window. Together, they gazed out at the red giant star beyond, its fiery surface pulsing with energy. "This summit, it's not going as I hoped." Zenera tilted her head slightly, her glowing tendrils shifting in a way that seemed almost thoughtful. "Few things ever do," she replied. "But sometimes, unexpected paths lead to greater outcomes." Hayes chuckled dryly. "I'm not sure we have time for unexpected paths. The stakes are too high." She studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing yet kind. "Perhaps you underestimate the power of honesty," she suggested. "Many here see humanity as aggressive, unyielding. But what if they saw vulnerability instead? What if they saw truth?" Her words struck a chord within Hayes, though he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his attention back to the view outside, watching as tiny ships zipped past the station, their lights blinking faintly against the vast darkness. "Truth is complicated," he said finally, "especially when it comes to our history." Zinera nodded slowly. "History shapes us all. And while mistakes cannot be undone, they can be acknowledged and learned from." She paused, her glow dimming slightly. "The Council listens to accusations because they fear what they do not understand. But fear fades when replaced by trust." Hayes glanced at her, surprised by the wisdom in her words. For days, he had been focused solely on strategy, on finding the right arguments to sway the Council. Yet Zinera was suggesting something different, something deeper. "You think confession could help?" he asked cautiously. "I think it might," she replied. "Not as a tactic, but as an offering. When leaders show humility, others are more willing to follow." The two stood in silence for a while longer, the hum of the station filling the space between them. Eventually, Hayes broke the quiet. "Thank you," he said simply, "for listening, and for your advice." Zinera inclined her head gracefully. "I will support you, Admiral Hayes, in whatever way I can. But remember, the path you choose must come from within." As they parted ways, Hayes felt a flicker of resolve strengthen inside him. Zinera's words had given him clarity, even if the road ahead remained uncertain. He knew now that his next move would require more than logic or strategy. It would demand courage, and perhaps, just perhaps, that courage would be enough to change the tide. Back in the private quarters assigned to the human delegation, the atmosphere was tense but quieter. The hum of the station's systems provided a faint background noise as Admiral Robert Hayes paced slowly across the room. His advisors, Dr. Laura Bennett and Captain Daniel Foster, sat at a small table, their faces etched with concern. A holographic display floated between them, showing maps of contested territories and data on recent conflicts. But Hayes wasn't looking at the maps. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the floor, his mind clearly elsewhere. Finally, he stopped pacing and turned to face them. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice low and steady. Both Bennett and Foster looked up, sensing the weight behind his words. Hayes took a deep breath before continuing. "This isn't just about accusations or past mistakes. There's more at stake here." He walked over to the table and activated another hologram. This one showed a swirling mass of darkness against a backdrop of stars, a rogue black hole drifting through the galaxy. Its gravitational pull was already distorting nearby star systems, causing chaos among the species that called this region home. Hayes pointed to the image. "This is what we're really dealing with. If we don't act soon, it'll destabilize everything. Billions of lives will be lost, not just humans, but aliens too." Dr. Bennett stared at the projection, her eyes wide with shock. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "This changes everything." "I couldn't," Hayes replied. "Not until I was sure we had a plan. And not until I knew how far they'd push us. Revealing this now could still backfire if they see it as manipulation." He paused, his expression darkening. "Besides, even if they believe us, getting them to work with us won't be easy. They don't trust us." Captain Foster leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So what's the plan?" he asked. "How do we stop it?" Hayes explained that humanity had developed experimental devices called graviton stabilizers, machines capable of slowing the black hole's advance. But there was a catch. Deploying them required access to energy reserves scattered across alien-controlled territories. Without cooperation from the Council, the stabilizers would remain useless. "It's not just about technology," Hayes added. "It's about convincing them to set aside their grievances and work together for survival." Bennett rubbed her temples, clearly overwhelmed. "Even if they agree, it'll take time to coordinate something like this. And time is one thing we don't have." Hayes nodded grimly. "I know, but we don't have a choice. If we don't try, we lose everything." He glanced at Foster. "What do you think?" Foster exhaled sharply, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "It's risky," he admitted. "If they find out we've known about this all along and kept it hidden, they'll see it as proof of our so-called aggression. We might lose whatever slim chance we have left." "I'm aware of the risks," Hayes said firmly, "but keeping silent won't save anyone. Trust me, I fought this through. We need to frame this as a shared problem, not ours alone. Survival has a way of bringing people, or species, together." The three fell silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Bennett spoke up. "You're going to tell them, aren't you? At the next session?" "Yes," Hayes replied, "but not just about the black hole. There's something else I need to say, something harder." His voice softened slightly, though his resolve didn't waver. "We can't move forward without addressing the truth about who we are and what we've done." Foster raised an eyebrow. "You mean confessing? To everyone?" "To the council," Hayes confirmed. "They deserve to hear it from me. Only then can we start rebuilding trust." Bennett looked at him with a mixture of admiration and worry. "It's bold," she said quietly, "but it might also destroy us." Hayes met her gaze, his eyes reflecting both determination and doubt. "Maybe," he admitted, "but sometimes destruction is necessary to create something stronger. Let's hope the council sees it that way." As the meeting ended, Hayes returned to the window, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. The rogue black hole loomed large in his mind, but so did the burden of leadership. Whatever happened next, he knew, would test not only his courage, but the very soul of humanity itself. The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with a mix of voices, some sharp and accusing, others low and calculating. The air felt heavier now, charged with the weight of unspoken fears and simmering hostilities. Admiral Robert Hayes sat quietly at the human delegation's pod, his hands resting lightly on the table in front of him. His calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the chaos around him. Across the room, representatives from various alien species continued to voice their grievances, their holographic displays flashing with data meant to support their claims. The Krillins were among the loudest. Their insectoid forms shifted constantly, antennae twitching as they spoke in rapid bursts of clicks and chirps. Their leader, a towering figure with iridescent armor, leaned forward aggressively, mandibles snapping as he accused humanity of exploiting weaker species for resources. "Your kind consumes without restraint," he declared, his translated words echoing through the chamber. "You leave nothing but ruin in your wake." Next came the Vorthix, their watery forms shimmering inside their containment suits. One of them floated closer to the center of the room, its melodic voice carrying an undertone of anger. "Your ships have trespassed into sacred zones," it said, its words accompanied by eerie, harmonic tones. "You disrupt the balance we have maintained for centuries." Other species joined in, each adding their own accusations to the growing list. Some cited environmental damage caused by human mining operations. Others pointed to incidents where human vessels had allegedly fired upon civilian craft. Hayes listened intently, his face betraying no emotion. Beside him, Dr. Laura Bennett scribbled notes furiously on a digital pad, her brow furrowed in concentration. Captain Daniel Foster, meanwhile, kept a watchful eye on the crowd, his hand never straying far from his weapon. Though the summit was meant to be peaceful, the tension in the room was palpable. Any sudden move could spark panic, or worse. When the floor finally opened for responses, Hayes rose again, his movements deliberate and measured. He didn't speak immediately, instead scanning the room with a steady gaze. When he did begin, his voice carried a quiet authority that commanded attention. "I hear your concerns," he said, addressing the council directly, "and I understand the gravity of the situation. But before we proceed further, I must ask for additional time to ensure my response is thorough and accurate." His request was met with immediate backlash. A delegate from the Siren Collective, a reptilian species with scales that glimmered like polished stone, slammed a clawed hand against their podium. More delays. The Exuran hissed. Do you think us fools? Every moment you stall gives your fleets more time to fortify their positions. Others echoed similar sentiments, their voices rising in a cacophony of distrust. Even Zinara, the soft-spoken ambassador from the Luminary, seemed hesitant to intervene. Her luminous form hovered silently near the back of the chamber, her glowing tendrils pulsating faintly as she observed the unfolding drama. Dr. Bennett leaned closer to Hayes, her voice barely above a whisper. This isn't going well, she murmured. They're losing patience. If we don't give them something concrete soon, they'll turn on us completely. I know, Hayes replied, his tone steady despite the mounting pressure. But giving them half-truths won't help either. Trust me, we need this time. As the session dragged on, tempers flared higher. Several delegates began shouting over one another, their holographic translators struggling to keep up with the overlapping arguments. In the midst of the chaos, Hayes remained still, his focus unwavering. He knew the truth, that humanity wasn't entirely innocent, but revealing everything at once would only make matters worse. Timing was critical, and he needed to choose his next move carefully. Finally, after what felt like hours, the moderator called for a recess. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, many shot dark looks toward the human delegation. Hayes ignored them, turning instead to his advisors. We need to prepare, he said simply, because when we come back, we'll have just one chance to get this right. Bennett nodded, her expression grim. Foster exhaled sharply, muttering under his breath about how much longer they could hold off the inevitable. But Hayes didn't respond. Instead, he stared out the window at the red giant star beyond, its fiery surface casting long shadows across the orbital station. Whatever happened next, he knew, would shape not only humanity's future, but the fate of countless other species as well. The room was vast, almost impossibly so. It stretched far beyond what the human eye could comfortably take in, its curved walls shimmering with a faint otherworldly glow. The air hummed with energy, not just from the countless machines that kept the station orbiting the massive red giant star below, but also from the tension filling every corner of the chamber. Representatives from dozens of alien species had gathered here, their forms ranging from towering insectoids to translucent beings suspended in floating tanks of liquid. Each group sat at their designated pods, surrounded by holographic displays that translated every word spoken into their native languages. At the center of it all stood Admiral Robert Hayes. He was a tall man, his posture straight and commanding, though there was no arrogance in the way he carried himself. His uniform was simple yet striking, adorned only with a few medals earned through decades of service. Beside him were two trusted advisors, Dr. Laura Bennett, a scientist whose expertise in alien biology made her invaluable, and Captain Daniel Foster, a soldier whose loyalty to Hayes was matched only by his skill in combat. Together, they formed a trio representing humanity's best hope for navigating this delicate situation. The stakes were high. Rumors had spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Rumors that humanity had overstepped its bounds, encroaching on territories belonging to weaker species and exploiting resources without regard for the consequences. The accusations came from many sides, especially from the Krillins, an insectoid race known for their hive mind mentality, and the Vorthix, aquatic creatures who communicated through eerie, melodic clicks amplified by their water-filled suits. Their leaders wasted no time voicing their grievances, their voices sharp and accusing as they demanded answers. Hayes listened quietly, his expression unreadable. His silence unnerved the council. Some interpreted it as defiance, others saw it as weakness. But those who knew him well understood that Hayes was biding his time. He wasn't ready to speak, not yet. Instead, he observed, taking note of every nuance in tone, every flicker of emotion displayed, or concealed, by the assembled delegates. Dr. Bennett leaned closer to him at one point, whispering urgently. "You need to address them soon," she said under her breath. They're growing restless. They'll wait, Hayes replied calmly, his eyes never leaving the podium where the next speaker was addressing the crowd. Timing is everything. Captain Foster shifted slightly beside him, his hand resting instinctively near the blaster holstered at his side. Though the summit was supposed to be peaceful, tensions ran dangerously high. Any misstep could escalate into violence, or worse, war. And if that happened, humanity would find itself outnumbered and outgunned. Foster glanced at Hayes, wondering how the Admiral remained so composed when the weight of the galaxy seemed to rest squarely on his shoulders. As the session dragged on, Hayes finally rose to his feet, signaling that he wished to speak. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward him. For a moment, he simply stood there, letting the anticipation build. Then, in a calm, steady voice, he addressed the council. "I understand your concerns," he began, choosing each word carefully. "And I assure you, humanity is committed to resolving these issues fairly and openly." His statement did little to quell the unease rippling through the chamber. If anything, it seemed to fuel more questions than answers. Hayes, however, appeared unfazed. He requested additional time to prepare humanity's defense, a move that drew murmurs of suspicion from some corners of the room. Yet, even as doubts lingered, none could deny the quiet confidence radiating from the human Admiral. Whatever Hayes was planning, it was clear he wasn't going to back down without a fight.